My name is Jonathan Parker, and I'm a faculty member in the School of Media and Design.
In your experience, what would you say are some of the major concerns from international students regarding the Canadian federal government?
They're not very impressed with the Canadian federal government right now. I'm very fortunate that I get to work with international students in a lot of different programs and at different levels. So I work with some newly arrived level 1 international students, some level 3 students in one of the programs I teach in, and a few scattered throughout some of the other programs I teach in. There's a lot of uncertainty, obviously, and they're feeling it the most. And the international students that I'm working with right now are highly accomplished people. They're in graduate certificates. And so these students are ones for whom they have job experience. They already have degrees and diplomas from wherever it was that they're coming from. In many cases, they have family as well. So some of them have left their family behind and they've come here hoping to reunite. In other cases, they've brought their whole families with them. And the nature of the changes has left them very unsettled. And they've said many times that they feel like they're being treated very unfairly and that they don't know what it is that they're supposed to do. And they feel like, they've invested so much of themselves into this process, and to have the goalposts change all of a sudden, they want to succeed and they want to stay here and they want to be part of our communities, and they just want clear answers about how they can do that.
Going off of that, why has the government chosen to make these changes for international students?
I think that there's a number of reasons. Some of them are policy and some of them are political. So, on the policy front, there was, it took a long time for the federal government to begin to acknowledge and really explore the effects that the old system was having on population growth and the strain that it was applying to things like housing supply and access to services that like healthcare services and other things like that. To a certain degree, a little bit of that was overstated, but it was also more true than what the current government was willing to accept for a really long time. And, somewhat to the credit of the current immigration minister, he looked at the system. So as you all know, and as everybody knows, the federal government sets targets about how many people they're going to let into the country every year. And there's been a general consensus amongst the Canadian population that population growth is good for our country for a whole bunch of different reasons. And that's been stable for a really, really long time. What was happening upon further inspection was that there was almost like a shadow immigration system. And so when the federal government set their target at about 500,000 people per year, they were relatively confident that the country could handle that and could absorb that level of population growth. But they weren't, it doesn't appear to me like they were actually counting international students who were coming in. And so when they re-looked at the numbers, it was well over 1 million people coming into the country as opposed to 500,000. And you do that for a couple of years over and over again, and you have this enormous population growth, this huge explosion, and you don't have the infrastructure set up to support them, right? And so the current immigration minister, he identified this and he gave quite a bit of warning to say, look, provinces, you need to readjust what you're doing specifically with international students. He gave them clear opportunity to change the behavior and move in a different direction. And he made expressly clear the exact words he used were that he would use a blunt policy instrument in order to correct it if things didn't change. And what he was foreshadowing was what we've seen now. He employed that blunt instrument, which was ministerial directive, a change in direction, change in policy orientation, to say, look, now we're taking back control of this, we're wresting it away from the provinces, and here's what the new system is going to look like, and we're purposely going to deprive institutions of the number of international students that they become accustomed to. And so we're living the fallout of that decision now. No problem.
What are the Liberals' plans when it comes to international students?
We're living it. And aside from that, I don't know. And I don't necessarily think that they know. You know, their plan is, it's to limit the population growth to a level that they deem to be acceptable. And what's deemed acceptable is based on a whole bunch of different factors and metrics. And they have access to that information because they're the government. And so they can analyze the pros and the cons of the policy decisions that they've made. If I had to guess, one of the things that we know from the changes is that it was a policy overcorrection. The changes that they made have had a more dramatic effect than what they originally intended. And we know this because we can look at the application numbers now of what we anticipate for incoming international students, and they're lower than what those new minimum targets are. And so what that suggests is that international students are they're not interested in coming to Canada. Many of them are skipping Canada and they're going to the UK and to other jurisdictions that they have a better prospect of success and security once they get there. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see the Liberal government change the metrics that they have now in realization that they've overcorrected and now they've created a new problem that needs to be solved. There's no indication that they're necessarily going to do that, but you know, to my point previously that the current immigration minister recognized the problem, said he was going to take action and took action, I think he's reasonable enough to also recognize that the action he took has had unintended consequences and that there's a balance that needs to be found. I think it's just going to take some time for them to decide how they want to recalibrate towards that balance.
On that note, do the Conservatives have any plans? And if so, what are they?
The Conservatives don't have, they have, it's not fully fleshed out, I wouldn't say. So there's a lot of gaps in the plans. It's not entirely clear how it would work in practice. One of the interesting things between the NDP's position on immigration and the Conservatives' positions on immigration is an emphasis on family reunification, which has been an issue in immigration policy for quite some time because we have people who take a chance, they come here, and of course they want to be with their loved ones, they want to bring their families here with them. And that particular part of immigration was not working for a very long time, and it experienced some success as a result of recalibrations and retooling. And so it's nice that those two parties are aligned on the importance and emphasizing family reunification in their policies. But in the case of the Conservatives, there's a lot of inconsistency. So Pierre Poilievre has argued that he's going to tie immigration levels to housing levels. And that leaves a number of questions. So we know that Canada has a rapidly aging population. Of that rapidly aging population, many baby boomers are going to be moving into retirement, which means they're exiting the labor force. And so, you know, housing policy is largely local, and there's not necessarily, I mean, we're still in a housing crisis, right? So if we can't build houses, are we going to, under a Conservative government, exacerbate our immigration issues by refusing to let people in and thereby increasing the labor shortage and restricting economic growth? That part's not clear. And so, frankly, the other two parties need to be a lot more fulsome and a lot more honest in what it is that they plan to do with immigration, because it is big, it is complicated, and as we all know, and as we all see, and as we're all living, like, these are real humans' lives that we're talking about. These are people who are investing enormous amounts of money themselves. They're dragging their families halfway across the world in order to look for new opportunities. And so, and there's also a credibility issue with Canadians. I mean, Canadians are seized with this issue, and to just, you know, to speak in generalities and to not fill in the gaps is doing a disservice to Canadians in general. So, you know, there's lots of criticism to be leveled against the Liberal government and its policies. We can see those, though, and we can critique them. If the other parties, if they want to be taken seriously, then I would argue that they need to be much more upfront and fulsome in what it is that they plan on doing, because at this point it's just not clear.
What are each party's plans for immigration if they were to win the next federal election?
I can't. Aside from what I just said, it's not even. It's very singular, and it raises enormous questions. And they've summarized them, in tiny sound bites and petitions. And it seems like to me that they're much more interested in fundraising off of the issue. They're more interested in generating clicks about the issue as opposed to providing clear policy solutions that are really going to give Canadians an indication of what we should do moving forward, or what they would do differently, if anything.
To the best of your ability, can you explain why it's important to continue immigration in Canada?
Well, because the Canadians who are here only want to pay so many taxes in order to support the lives that we're used to, right? We need economic growth on a continuous basis, and we need to recognize that there's a mathematical fact, there's a mathematical tidal wave that is heading towards us, and there's no stopping it, right? We have our parents, our grandparents. They make up a very, very sizable chunk of our population, and the share of the population that they comprise it will grow very, very rapidly, very, very quickly. And so if we looked at our population now and we say, okay, nobody else dies, nobody else is born, nobody leaves, and we kept it entirely static, in 10 years' time, what we're going to see in a simulation like that is that working age populations are going to have they're going to have to give up much more in income taxes of their salaries in order to ensure that our moms and our dads and our aunts and our uncles and our grandparents have the level of health care that they're accustomed to, right? These folks they're going to need new knees, they're going to need new hips, they're going to need pacemakers, they're going to need medication. We're talking about National Pharmacare program, like on and on and on the list goes. And I think that, in all sincerity, Canadians like looking after one another, right? And so if we want to ensure that seniors, boomers, will have the quality of life that they deserve, then we need to fund it. Kind of brushing up against that or creating some friction against that is the quality of life that millennials and Gen Z and those whatever comes after Gen Z, what kind of quality of life they want to have, right? So it becomes, it sets up for a little bit of intergenerational conflict where different groups are demanding more and more from government, and they're demanding, by extension, that other people pay for it. And those who are paying, we know what happens after coming through inflation, we know what happens when we feel like our quality of life is being diminished, right? Like it's not about getting ahead, we don't even feel like we can catch up anymore, right? We feel like the good life is moving farther and farther away from us. That has consequences on how we view politics, on how we view each other, what we're willing to do for each other. And so the way around that is to ensure a healthy, stable flow of the best and brightest immigrants into the country who bring their hard work ethic, who bring their optimism, who bring diverse culture, who bring entrepreneurship, and who are going to settle in Canada and develop new businesses and become teachers and become nurses and personal support workers. They're going to be the people that we all need in order to help our country grow, right?
On the other hand, what are the pros international students are seeing with our government?
They're not. I don't know a single one, and this is anecdotal, admittedly, I don't know a single one who is happy with the current government. And of the international students I know, many are concerned about what a change in government might mean for them. So as far as they're concerned, there's no good options for them, right? And that's a scary place for them to be. I think it's important to say, it's not really related to the question that you asked, but it's an important thing to consider in this context, and that is international students have helped us, and the changes have helped us better understand how much they were propping up our post-secondary system, how much of the financial burden they were shouldering in order for domestic students to pay the fees that they're paying, right? They're acutely aware now, more than ever, of how much they were contributing to the success or the stability of these institutions, right? And so to suddenly become so aware of how important they were, and then to have the feelings of the way that they've been treated is like a double whammy, right? They all need to finish their programs too. So they need to be stuck inside of a system that, from their perspective, is telling them we don't want you, we want your money, right? So no, they're not happy with the current government federally. They're not happy with the current government provincially. They're not happy with the people who might take over at either level of government, should there be any changes in government. And I think it's really important for us to understand how reputationally damaging this has been for the Canada brand, right? They came here because it was supposed to be maple syrup, sunshine, and opportunity, and it's been anything but that for them. And it's really affected their view of there's a contrast in many of their minds right now between what they were told Canadians were and who they now think Canadians are. And I think that's, I think all of us need to think deeply about that and kind of look ourselves in the mirror and ask ourselves, is this who we really are? Is this who we want to be?
There's almost no hope for them, right?
There's hope. They have.
Of course, but it's like being in that position. Like I could just picture just having not the same kind of hope you did have, especially just coming here and as you described, what we kind of promote as Canadians, right, and who we are. So it's discouraging. Right?
It's discouraging for sure. There's been there was a hopelessness and an exasperation. But what I've been fortunate to learn, having taught so many international students, is how remarkably resilient they are, and how remarkably competent and how resourceful they are, and they're willing to take chances, right? They're not. Many of them are not risk averse. I mean, they came this far, right? If they've come this far, then there's not much that's going to stop them. So. They might not be okay here, but they're going to be okay at some point. They're going to land on their feet.
Is there anything that you feel wasn't necessarily touched on that you feel is important to relay to international students?
One thing I would want to make known, and I kind of alluded to it, but I would really like to make it as clear as possible. The Ontario system in particular we provide the least amount of per student funding for our post-secondary students. And we're one of the wealthiest provinces, if not the wealthiest province in the country. And I'll also say that it is not just this current government who has made choices to fund our domestic students at the lowest per student level. This is an issue that has been going on for quite literally decades, right? And so in a roundabout way, these decisions and these consequences are ones that Ontarians have made for a very long time. We've been insisting on not paying what we need to pay in order to fund the systems to the degree that we say we want them funded at, or to the quality that we expect them to be. And we can only do that for so long before we start to see the strains and creaks. And we're living through that right now.
And would you look at Alex and Adrian at the Alex, Adrian, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much for having me.
Anytime.
Coming.